So what is ICSI and should I use it for my IVF? So if you imagine a woman is doing IVF and we collect her eggs, then we have two main options for the fertilization process. We can either put the eggs into a bath of sperm and just watch as they fertilize naturally, and that's as close as we can get really to the actual process that women go when they fall pregnant naturally. Or we can look at the sperm under the microscope and find the sperm that looks the best. So we'd be looking for a sperm that has one head that's a normal shape, not too big, not too small, one tail, not two, not three, and it's swimming fast and forwards. So it's not going backwards, it's not going sideways, it's not just moving on the spot. And that would be the sperm we would then aspirate into a tiny needle and inject into the egg. And that will help with the fertilization process. So those are the two options: conventional fertilization with the bath of sperm, or ICSI, intracytoplasmic sperm injection. We inject the sperm into the egg. So ICSI was a technique that was initially developed for men who had really poor quality sperm, and it's still used for that reason today. But nowadays, many clinics use ICSI to improve their fertilization rates. And about 10 to 15 years ago, people were worried. They were worried about ICSI. They were wondering whether some of the very rare abnormalities that are detected in children that come from the IVF process, whether that came from the actual ICSI process. And what they've worked out now is that it's not the ICSI process itself. It may possibly come from the abnormalities in the sperm being passed on to the offspring. So it's not the actual technique. The technique itself seems to be, doesn't seem to be problematic, doesn't seem to create any problems at all. So who should use ICSI? Well, as I mentioned, it tends to be used in men who have very poor quality sperm. So that means either a low count, or they don't swim very well, or they're very morphologically abnormal and you need the microscope to pick out the normal ones. But we also can use ICSI for men who don't actually produce any sperm in an ejaculate sample, but they do have sperm inside the testes. So there's an obstruction somewhere between the testes and the ejaculate sample. So for them, we can go to the testes, extract some heads of sperm and use those for ICSI to fertilize the eggs. And then there are some reasons related to the women that you might want to use ICSI. So if a woman is doing IVF and she only produces 1 or 2 eggs, all eggs after IVF are very valuable to that woman. But when you only produce 1 or 2, there's kind of pressure and you really want to fertilize everything you have. So in that case, you might use ICSI to try and maximize the fertilization rate. And you might also want to use ICSI if the shell of a woman's egg is very thick. So as we get older, as women get older, the thickness of the shell of our eggs, it gets thicker, which is why people use assisted hatching and things like that. And so sometimes you need help with the fertilization process. The sperm needs help to actually get through that shell. And so that's why you might use ICSI for a reason related to the woman. And then in general, we would often recommend ICSI if people have tried conventional fertilization several times without success. Also, if they've used IVF, they've done IVF many times and it's not been successful, we would move on to ICSI if it hasn't been used before. And also if you're planning to do pre-implantation genetic testing for aneuploidies, that's where you examine the embryos to see if they're genetically normal. Usually you want to have as many embryos available as possible for that process. And so again, you do ICSI at the beginning to try and maximize the number of embryos that are created to test.